The room was silent except for the low, mechanical hum of oxygen. It was 2:17 in the morning. Tammy Slaton sat alone in the dark. Not asleep. Not awake. Just existing. The blue glow from her phone screen illuminated her face, casting soft shadows across features that had endured years of struggle, judgment, and survival. She wasn't scrolling. She wasn't watching anything. She was staring at her own reflection in the black mirror of the powered-off television across the room, and for the first time in her life, she didn't recognize herself. Not physically, but mentally, because something inside her had changed. Something permanent. Something irreversible. And what happened next would shock millions of people around the world. Introduction: Why this story matters. For years, Tammy Slaton was more than a reality television personality. She was a symbol. To some, she represented struggle. To others, frustration. To many, she was hope. Millions watched her journey on television, witnessing moments that were painfully raw. Moments where breathing itself was a challenge. Moments where doctors quietly wondered if she would survive another year. And there were times when it seemed like Tammy herself had stopped believing she could. What most people never saw was what happened when the cameras stopped rolling. The silence. The doubt. The internal battles that no one could fix for her. Because the hardest transformation wasn't her body. It was her mind. And in 2026, everything changed. But not in the way anyone expected. Background and setup. To understand Tammy's transformation, you have to go back to a moment most people overlooked. Late 2023. The cameras were off. The social media posts were less frequent. And for the first time in years, Tammy was spending extended periods alone. Not isolated, but quiet. Healing. Her apartment was modest. Nothing extravagant. Just a couch, a television, a small kitchen, and windows that overlooked a quiet Kentucky street. Life had slowed down. But inside her mind, something else was happening. For years, Tammy had lived in survival mode. Every day was about getting through the next breath, the next doctor's appointment, the next moment of public scrutiny. But survival mode doesn't allow reflection. Survival mode doesn't allow growth. It only allows existence. And when survival was no longer the immediate threat, her mind finally had space to ask questions she had avoided for decades. Questions like, who am I without the struggle? Who am I without the pain? Who am I if I survive? And those questions terrified her. Because pain had become familiar. Pain was predictable. Healing was unknown. Rising conflict. One evening in early 2024, Tammy sat across from her sister, Amy Slaton. The room smelled faintly of coffee. Amy was talking about something ordinary. Something small. Something forgettable. But Tammy wasn't listening. She was watching. Watching how easily Amy moved. How easily she laughed. How easily she lived. Not with jealousy, but with realization. For years, Tammy had believed the world was something that happened to her. But now, for the first time, she began to wonder if she had the power to change her relationship with it. Not overnight. Not magically. But gradually. Painfully. Intentionally. And that realization planted a seed. A dangerous seed. Because once you realize change is possible, you can no longer hide behind the comfort of impossibility. And that terrified her more than anything. The first shift. The transformation didn't begin with a dramatic moment. It began with something small. So small no one noticed. One morning, Tammy woke up before her alarm. She didn't reach for her phone. She didn't turn on the television. She just sat there, breathing, feeling, present. For most people, this moment would mean nothing. But for Tammy, it was the first time she wasn't running from herself. The first time she allowed silence without distraction. And in that silence, she felt something unfamiliar. Not happiness, not sadness, but awareness. Awareness of her existence. Awareness of her potential. Awareness of time. Because time had always felt like something happening around her. But now she could feel it moving with her. And she realized something that would change everything. She was still here. Despite everything, she was still here. And that meant something. But what she didn't know yet was how much her life was about to change, the moment no one saw coming. In late 2025, something happened that Tammy would never publicly talk about in full detail. Not because she was hiding it, but because some moments are too personal to fully explain. It was late at night. She was alone. The world was quiet. And she found herself looking at old photos. Photos from years ago. Photos of a version of herself that felt like a stranger. Not just physically. Emotionally. Mentally. Spiritually. She stared at those images for a long time. Longer than she expected. And then something inside her broke. Not in despair. In clarity. Because for the first time, she didn't see failure. She saw survival. She saw someone who endured. Someone who suffered. Someone who stayed. And she realized something that would redefine her future. She wasn't weak for struggling. She was strong for surviving. And that single shift in perspective changed everything. The transformation begins. Transformation isn't a moment. It's a decision. And Tammy made that decision quietly, privately, without announcement, without validation, without permission. She stopped focusing on what she had lost and started focusing on what she still had. Time, breath, possibility. And slowly, something began to change. Not just her body, her posture, her presence, her energy. People around her noticed it before she did. There was something different in her eyes. Something steady. Something calm. Something determined. But no one knew why. Because the real transformation wasn't visible yet. It was happening inside her mind. And what would happen next would leave fans speechless. The decision didn't feel dramatic. There was no music. No audience. No camera capturing the moment. Just Tammy. And silence. It was early January 2026. Outside, Kentucky was frozen in winter. The trees were bare, skeletal silhouettes against a dull gray sky. The cold pressed against the apartment windows like an unwelcome visitor that refused to leave. Inside, the air was still. Tammy sat on the edge of her bed. Her oxygen machine hummed softly beside her, a sound that had been her companion for years. A reminder. A lifeline. A symbol of both survival and limitation. She stared down at her hands. For most of her life, those hands had felt like they belonged to someone else. Someone she couldn't control. Someone she couldn't fully save. But this morning was different. Because this was the first morning she wasn't afraid of her future. And that realization alone was terrifying. Because fear had always been her anchor. Fear was predictable. Fear told her what to expect. Hope did not. And hope was dangerous. Because hope meant responsibility. Hope meant she couldn't give up anymore. Hope meant she had to try. And what happened next was something no one, not even Tammy herself, was prepared for. The invisible battle. Most people think transformation is physical. Weight lost. Muscle gained. Appearance changed. But those are just symptoms. The real transformation happens in the mind. And Tammy's mind had been a battlefield for decades. Every memory, every insult, every comment online from strangers who believed they understood her life based on edited television scenes. They didn't see the nights she cried when no one was watching. They didn't see the moments she questioned whether she deserved to survive. They didn't see the exhaustion of existing in a world that constantly reminded her of her past. Because pain doesn't disappear when your body changes. Pain lives in memory. And memory is harder to escape. But something had shifted. Not suddenly. Not magically. Slowly. Gradually. Like ice melting beneath the first warmth of spring. Tammy began doing something she had never done before. She forgave herself. Not completely. Not instantly. But enough to take the first step forward. And that step would change everything. A simple moment that meant everything. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning. No cameras. No announcement. No audience. Tammy stood in front of her bathroom mirror. For a long time, she avoided mirrors. Mirrors were confrontational. They didn't lie. They didn't soften reality. But today, she didn't look away. She studied her reflection. Her face. Her eyes. And she noticed something that shocked her. She didn't see weakness. She saw endurance. Her face wasn't the face of someone who failed. It was the face of someone who survived something most people couldn't even imagine. And in that moment, something inside her shifted permanently. Because she realized she wasn't fighting herself anymore. She was fighting for herself. And that single psychological shift became the foundation of everything that followed. But the world hadn't seen it yet. The world was about to. The first public appearance of 2026. February 2026. A quiet afternoon. Tammy stepped outside her apartment building. The cold air hit her face, sharp and immediate. She inhaled deeply. Not because she had to. Because she could. And that difference meant everything. For years, every breath had felt borrowed. Temporary. Fragile. But now, breathing felt natural. Normal. She walked slowly down the sidewalk. Each step intentional. Each step real. A neighbor passing by glanced at her. Then did a double take. There was no recognition at first. Just confusion. Then realization. Their eyes widened slightly. Not dramatically. Not rudely. Just surprise. Because the person they remembered wasn't the person standing in front of them now. And Tammy noticed it. Not the judgment. The absence of it. For the first time in her adult life, she wasn't being seen as the girl who couldn't survive. She was just being seen as a person. And that realization hit harder than any insult ever had. Because this time, she wasn't invisible. She was free. The phone call that changed everything. Later that evening, her phone rang. It was Amy. Tammy hesitated before answering. Not because she didn't want to talk, but because she didn't yet have words for what she was becoming. She answered anyway. Amy's voice came through the speaker, familiar and warm. But there was something else. Emotion. Amy had seen recent photos. Seen recent videos. And there was silence on the line for a moment. Then Amy said something Tammy would never forget. "I'm proud of you." 3 simple words. But they carried the weight of decades. Decades of shared struggle. Shared pain. Shared survival. Tammy didn't respond immediately. Because pride was something she wasn't used to receiving. Not like this. Not without condition. And in that moment, Tammy realized something profound. She wasn't just changing her body. She was changing her legacy. And what happened next would shock everyone. The viral moment. It wasn't planned. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't intentional. Someone saw Tammy in public. They took a photo. Posted it online. No caption. Just the image. Within hours, it spread. Within days, millions had seen it. Comments flooded social media. People couldn't believe their eyes. Not because of how she looked, but because of how she carried herself. Her posture. Her confidence. Her presence. She didn't look like someone fighting to survive anymore. She looked like someone who already had. And that psychological difference was impossible to fake. Fans were speechless. Not because she became someone else, but because she finally became herself. The internal realization no one could see. But the biggest change wasn't visible. It happened quietly. One evening, Tammy sat alone again. Same apartment. Same chair. Same oxygen machine beside her. Except this time, it wasn't turned on. It hadn't been needed. She stared at it for a long time. Not with resentment. Not with anger. But with gratitude. Because that machine had kept her alive long enough to become who she was now. She reached out. Placed her hand on it gently. And whispered something no one else heard. "Thank you." Not because she needed it anymore. But because she had. And without it, she wouldn't be here. That moment wasn't dramatic. But it was permanent. Because Tammy Slaton was no longer surviving. She was living. And the world was only beginning to realize what that meant. The truth about transformation. Transformation isn't about becoming someone new. It's about returning to the person you were always meant to be. Before fear, before pain, before doubt. Tammy didn't transform into a different person. She uncovered the person who had been buried beneath years of survival. And in 2026, for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. The day finally came. March 2026. Tammy Slaton stepped onto the set of a small talk show in Nashville, Kentucky. The lights were bright. The cameras hummed. The crew moved around her, professional, focused, unaware of what was about to unfold. She paused at the entrance, taking a deep breath. Not the shallow, labored breath that had once defined her life, but a deep, full, intentional breath. One that carried months of quiet struggle, reflection, and incremental victory. As she walked toward the stage, the crew's eyes followed her, not out of judgment, but out of instinctive curiosity. There was a tension in the air, subtle but palpable. Everyone felt it. Something about Tammy was different. Something had changed. The public reveal. She sat down across from the host, a familiar figure from regional television. The cameras rolled. The interview began. Casual questions. Small talk. Yet beneath every word, every glance, was a quiet anticipation. Then came the moment. The host asked the inevitable, "Tammy, you've changed. Everyone online is talking about it. Can you tell us what's happening?" Tammy smiled softly, not the forced smile of someone trying to appease, but the calm, grounded smile of someone who has fought hard for every ounce of peace she now carries. "I don't think people realize change doesn't happen overnight," she said. "And it's not just what you see." Her eyes glimmered. "It's what you survive, what you forgive, and what you choose to live for every single day." There was a pause. A quietness that filled the studio. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, capturing more than just an image, capturing the energy of someone reborn. And then, without warning, Tammy leaned forward, her voice softer but stronger than ever. "I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living. And I've finally allowed myself to do that." The audience was silent. Some shifted in disbelief. Some whispered to each other. And somewhere, a collective realization hit everyone watching at home. This was real. This was not a story about weight. Not about cameras. Not about social media. This was a human being reclaiming her life. Fan reactions. Within hours, clips from the interview went viral. Comments poured in. "She looks happy. Genuinely happy. I don't think I've ever seen her so confident. Tammy Slaton has given me hope I didn't think I could feel again." Fans weren't just reacting to a physical transformation. They were witnessing emotional courage. They were witnessing resilience. But among the praise, there were skeptics. People who doubted, questioned, or criticized. Tammy saw it all. And for the first time, it didn't hurt. Because she had finally built something unshakable, her own sense of worth. Her own sense of self. The major twist. But the real shock wasn't the physical change. It was the decision she made afterward. Tammy announced she would start a private foundation, focused not on weight loss, but on mental health, self-forgiveness, and resilience for people struggling with chronic illness and trauma. It was unexpected, revolutionary, humble, grounded. People had expected more media appearances, more sensational content, more photo shoots. Instead, Tammy chose to use her experience to save others. Without fanfare, without self-promotion, just quiet impact. Fans were speechless. Not because they expected glamour, but because they realized transformation isn't just about the individual. It's about what you give back to the world once you finally find yourself. Emotional peak. Behind the cameras, in her hotel room after the interview, Tammy finally allowed herself to reflect fully. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. The person staring back was someone she recognized now. Not perfect, not flawless, but alive, present, strong. She thought about the nights of despair, The hospital visits, the oxygen machines, the public scrutiny, the self-doubt. And she cried. Not tears of sorrow. Not tears of frustration. But tears of release. Tears of survival. Because she had reached a place most people never do. Peace with herself. Climax. The climax of Tammy's journey wasn't a single event. It was the combination of all her quiet, courageous decisions coming together. It was stepping outside without fear. It was facing the world publicly. It was forgiving herself for surviving when so many doubted she could. It was transforming into the person she had been all along, just buried beneath layers of struggle, shame, and doubt. And when the world saw her in 2026, they didn't just see a transformation. They saw the embodiment of hope. Aftermath. Weeks later, Tammy began traveling, not for publicity, not for television, but to meet people whose lives had been touched by her story. She spoke to support groups, appeared in mental health forums, and shared her journey without filters. Every story she heard, every hand she shook, reminded her of the journey she had survived. And slowly, the world began to shift its perception. Not of her alone, but of resilience, of transformation, of the quiet power that comes from surviving when everything seems impossible. Reality check / deeper meaning. Tammy's story in 2026 proves something profound. Transformation isn't about who the world wants you to be. It's about who you are beneath the weight of judgment, expectation, and fear. It's about finding yourself when survival alone no longer satisfies you. Her journey isn't just a celebrity story. It's a universal lesson. Change begins quietly, grows internally, and only when you're ready does it show outwardly. And sometimes, the most shocking transformations are not physical. They are emotional, psychological, spiritual. Unforgettable ending. Tammy Slaton stood one evening on a quiet porch, looking at the Kentucky sunset. The sky was a blend of soft pinks and golden orange, a reminder of fleeting beauty, of time passing, and of life's fragility. She smiled, not because she had reached a destination, but because she had reclaimed her journey. The world may never fully understand every detail of her struggle. The cameras may not capture every quiet victory. But Tammy did. And in that realization, she was free. For the first time in her life, she wasn't defined by her past. She was defined by her courage, her choice, and her refusal to quit. And in that quiet moment, the world saw something impossible made real. Tammy Slaton had survived. Tammy Slaton had lived. Tammy Slaton had transformed. And fans were left speechless, not because of what she looked like, but because of what she had become. The weeks after her first public appearance in 2026 were a whirlwind, but not the kind most people imagine. There were no flashing cameras, no red carpets. Instead, there were quiet, almost mundane victories that felt monumental to Tammy. She woke up earlier than usual, not out of obligation, but because she wanted to. She cooked her breakfast slowly, savoring each bite, something she hadn't done in years without distraction. Even the simplest activities felt revolutionary. Every morning, she walked through her neighborhood. The cold still lingered in March, but the air no longer felt like an enemy. It was just air. Free. Breathing was no longer a challenge, and with every step, she felt lighter, not just physically, but mentally. Neighbors she had known for years noticed the change. A nod here, a smile there. But the shift in Tammy was more profound than what anyone could see on the surface. There was a serenity in her movement, a confidence that radiated silently but powerfully. A letter from the past. One day, Tammy found an old journal she had kept during her early days of fame. Dust coated the cover, but the pages were intact. She opened it to a random entry from 2019. I feel like I'm fading. People watch, but no one sees me. I'm tired of being the problem everyone else talks about. She paused, reading the words aloud. The sound of her own voice reciting her past despair was jarring, but it also reminded her how far she had come. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness, but of recognition. Recognition of the journey, the growth, the countless quiet battles that no one else had witnessed. And then she wrote a single line at the bottom of the page. I survived. And now, I live. This small act, A journal entry rewritten in her mind felt like a declaration, a promise, not to the world, but to herself. The visit that changed everything. In April, Tammy decided to visit a local hospital she had been in countless times. The corridors were familiar, sterile, and cold, yet now, walking through them didn't feel oppressive. She met a nurse who had helped her during one of her most critical stays in 2022. The nurse barely recognized her. Tammy's weight had decreased, yes, but it was more than that. Her eyes held clarity. Her posture held strength. Her smile radiated resilience. The nurse's reaction? Tears. Genuine tears. "Tammy, I don't know what to say. You've done the impossible," she whispered. Tammy shook her head softly. "It's not impossible. I just decided to survive differently this time." And in that simple exchange, Tammy realized something profound. Survival isn't just about enduring life. It's about redefining it. The foundation begins. By May 2026, Tammy had officially launched her foundation quietly. She didn't make a huge announcement. No flashy campaign. Just a website, a small team, and an intention to help people struggling with self-image, chronic illness, and trauma find a path forward. Her first few months were hesitant. They didn't know what to expect from someone they had only known through reality television. But as Tammy spoke, shared her struggles, and listened without judgment, walls crumbled. She realized that helping others wasn't just charity. It was a continuation of her own healing. Every story she heard, every hand she held, every tear shared reinforced her own journey. Fans who had followed her transformation online noticed the posts about her foundation. The reaction was overwhelming. Social media lit up not because of a physical change, but because of a human story of courage, empathy, and purpose. The night of reflection. One quiet evening in June, Tammy returned home after a long day at the foundation. The sky was painted in shades of orange and lavender, the last light of day stretching across the horizon. She sat on her porch swing, breathing in the warm summer air, reflecting on the months that had passed. She thought about the nights she had spent crying alone, the hospital visits, the surgeries she had undergone, the endless criticisms, the moments when she had doubted she would see 2026 at all. And now here she was, alive, thriving, giving back, living. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "I've finally arrived." It wasn't a boast. It wasn't pride. It was acknowledgement. For the first time in her life, Tammy didn't feel the weight of survival pressing down on her chest. She felt the lightness of being alive, freely, fully, intentionally. Fan interactions. By mid-2026, Tammy's social media following had shifted dramatically. She still had millions of followers,